Education sector stakeholders have expressed anger at proposed amendments to remove deadlines and timelines for the Education Department to repair and build schools infrastructure. Lobby group Equal Education says the removal of the deadline will pose a threat to learners and educators who occupy unsafe school infrastructure on a daily basis. They are even angrier that the public had not been adequately informed of the recent publication of the proposal. Although they applaud Basic Education Minister Hendrick Makaneta's role in ensuring safe school infrastructure since 2013's adoption of the infrastructure law, they lament that such progress has been painfully slow, with far too many schools still having pit toilets, overcrowded classrooms and damaged buildings. Joining us now to explain their challenge to the proposed amendments are Equal Education's Head of Organising in the Eastern Cape, Itumeleng Mothlabane, and educator and activist Hendrick Makaneta. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. And before we get into the conversation, let me invite you as well to be a part of the conversation. 072-110-5584. Do you think the attempts to amend the infrastructure regulation is a money or a management issue? I'd like to get your views on that. You can tweet us also tonight at Newzroom 405. Itumeleng, let me begin with you. And when you read the amendment, I'm summarizing here, but essentially what it says, as far as the infrastructure improvement regulation is concerned, all norms and standards must be planned, prioritized, and phased in with the National Development Plan. What does phased in with the National Development Plan mean to you, and how do you interpret that?
So as Equal Education, we interpret that as it will gradually be in the same pace as the National Development Plan, which we know that it has not been sufficient to service the people of South Africa. But also a crucial thing is that in that statement, there is a missing of by when and a clear stipulation of the years like we've had in the previous law of norms and standards. And we think that the omission of that crucial information is actually disservice to communities, particularly school communities who have been able to use this law to advocate since 2013 for betterment of schools. And as you have said, that because of this law, there has been improvement, even though it's been painfully slow. And that improvement is because of advocacy that has come from parents and learners using the law of norms and standards for public school infrastructure.
Hendrick Makaneta, what's your feeling on the following of the 2030 timeline?
Well, I think that 2030, is a program of government if we look at the National Development Plan. But you will remember, Thabo, that at some point the minister made a commitment along with the president that by 2023, that is next year, all pit latrines will be eradicated in our schools across the country. And then as we speak now, if you look at Limpopo alone, there are more than 2,000 schools which still use pit latrines. And we think that the amendment in terms of the new Basic Education Law Amendment Bill will certainly cause problems in relation to accountability, because it means, if deadlines are removed in terms of the new proposal, then society will not be able to hold a government accountable. So it is necessary in this case that we stick to deadlines. I mean, if you look at the Department of Basic Education, they give teachers deadlines in relation to teaching and learning. Teachers have got annual teaching plans which they have to stick by. By the end of the term, teachers must have covered a specific work. So that is how teachers are held accountable. So in the same note, government must also be held accountable in terms of deadlines. There must be deadlines for all programs that government has to undertake.
So do you think then, Itumeleng, the minister deliberately left that whole entire scheduling regulation out in a, I suppose, a spiteful way? Because I know on a number of occasions, Equal Education, you've taken her to court and you've been successful. Even recently around the immediately releasing the reports from provinces on the progress being made on repairs and the building of new classes. You were successful there as well. Is this, in your understanding, another part of the fight that the minister is waging against NGOs?
I can't provide you a straightforward answer there, but what I can assure you that if information is gazetted on a formal government document, then it's as intentional as it's written in that document. We know that before these things are gazetted, there are processes that they go through, even legal consultations. So leaving it out, we can never let it slip and think it was not intentional. However, what we do maintain is that we will continue the same way that you've cited, that we have been able to be successful in our court cases, to take the minister to court. And that is the same way that we are now voicing out the voices of school communities, because this isn't just equal education. It's learners, it's parents from different communities who have said, how does the minister expect us to access websites? You know, why is this not being brought to our communities? It is the very same communities who have said, we have been able to use this law to hold government accountable. So why are they now intentionally removing it from law? But also, I also think that also intentionally not engaging NGOs that we know are dealing with education justice when they are wanting to put forward, when they are wanting to change the law of norms and standards. This law was legislated because of the efforts of equal education. And in 2018, we actually won a court case to say this law must be tightened. There must be no scapegoats. But now when the minister finally does it, they only do it quietly and they put it on a website without even informing us. So that sends a clear message around like being intentional on like removing certain parts of the law that have been used for advocacy and like for real felt victories within school communities.
Yeah. Considering that regulation was put in place in 2013, as you say, the initial target was a 3-year deadline, which meant 2016. That was missed. We still are looking at a situation where we've got inadequate school infrastructure. We've got pit latrines, basically, that still exist. Do you think this has got to do with the fact that the government is not confident that it will be able to meet that deadline, and therefore they would be more comfortable with a 2030 deadline? And not to say that is an excuse, but do you think that could be the reason why?
Yeah. Look, I think nevertheless, even if the government can foresee that they will not be able to meet the deadline, there should still be that deadline, because the deadline, when they set it out, it was financially justifiable and it was within the range of what they said. It was even the minister then was Hendrick Makaneta who signed down this law, saying that this is something that would be manageable for government. So we don't think that now it is almost 10 years later since this law was legislated, and they can now go back and say some of these deadlines are not feasible, right? And part of our demands from the memorandum that we submitted to the minister was that pit latrines must be eradicated in the immediate, because that is a deadline from 2016 that she agreed and said it's financially viable, and this is something that we can do as a department. But right now you're sitting in an Eastern Cape that has about 1,400 and something pit latrines, and also the data shows you that the number is not going down in a way that is as quick as we would like for it to happen. So we think that it is an scapegoat for them to remove the deadlines because they think they cannot meet. In fact, as Equal Education, we are calling for them to meet the deadlines that have passed, which is the 2016 and the 2020 deadline, because it is unacceptable to be in 2022 and still not be able to meet a law that was signed down in 2013. Yes.
How can the department be held accountable for no deadlines? That's the conversation tonight here on In Focus, still with equal education as well as education activists, Hendrick Makaneta, and helping us through this conversation. Hendrick, what is particularly perplexing for me is that, of course, this shouldn't necessarily be a battle between government and NGOs or maybe the private sector as well, but it should be a collaboration of effort, expertise, and resources. And the private sector, in fact, one grouping that is able to raise money has been saying, we can eradicate this thing of pit latrines. Let's work together. We'll do a crowdfunding, raise the money. We know how to do this. Let's collaborate. And they are saying, so far their calls for collaboration have been responded to with a snail pace. Why? It's just particularly perplexing. It's just, is there no desire to collaborate on this thing? Is this equal education? I think previously had said there were challenges, for example, around setting of budgets and working efficiently. What do you think is behind the reluctance to collaborate?
Well, Thabo, I think that what we are lacking, or what is lacking rather, is the political will to address these nonsense standards in relation to infrastructure once and for all. But of course, we also note that government on its own, given the wide range of programs, social programs that they are involved in, they may not be able to resolve these things overnight. That is why for many years we've been calling on government to try and collaborate with the private sector so that they can find ways and means of resolving the issue of infrastructure, particularly in public schools, in townships as well as some of the rural communities. So the fact that government keeps on shifting the goalpost from time to time is a cause for concern. And we think that the private sector as well should not pay a lip service, to this program. It is one thing to call summits, to have discussions and to have plans, but it is another, to implement. So what I see happening now within the terrain of education is that there are plans, there are good plans. Recently in January there was the Lekota, basic education Lekota, where again good plans were crafted, but what is lacking is proper implementation. And I think that at this point we really need to stand up as society to call upon the state to prioritize this issue. I mean, as we speak now, there are learners who have already died as a result of pit latrines, some of whom fell into these pit latrines. And, we are not doing justice for their families who lost their loved ones if we keep on dragging our feet. But at the same time, the issue of dignity, sanitation brings dignity. Proper sanitation brings dignity to our people. The sooner it is addressed, the better. But we also know, Thabo, as I said, there are challenges of poverty, unemployment, as well as inequality. That is why we need an approach which is multi-dimensional, so that the Department of Basic Education should not be the only department that faces this issue. There must be a collaboration with other departments, such as, of course, Treasury. But I think the presidency as well must come out very clear to say what is the position of the presidency in this regard. We know recently, or 2 years ago, President Ramaphosa met with the Nelson Mandela Foundation to try and bring about the necessary solutions. But we have since had postponement of deadlines. And I think that it's about time that we resolve this issue once and for all.
Yeah. Itumeleng, I don't know if you were watching what came out this past weekend from the ANC's National Policy Conference. One of the subcommittees, which would I suppose have been of particular interest to you, is the Education Subcommittee, which says this. What is very urgent in basic education is to deal with overcrowding of classes. A program must be put in place. Overcrowding of classroom must be dealt with, and poor school infrastructure in public schools. What do you make of some of the suggestions that are coming out of there? I think one of them, which is maybe not in line with the building of new schools, but more of building of new classrooms in already existing schools.
Look, that is not far off from the report that Equal Education released last year in November that speaks about overcrowding as a big issue in urban areas, right? Which continues to be an issue because of rural-urban migration. So in our provinces like Gauteng, the Western Cape, overcrowding is a big issue. However, when you focus on rural provinces like the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KZN, in those provinces you find that the issue is the whole building in itself, the existence of build schools that are made with inappropriate material, the existence of pit latrine toilets that are posing a danger to learners. Equal Education in 2016 actually released also another report which was planning to fail. I think, as Mr. Hendrick has also alluded, there are great plans that are produced every now and again, but it seems like it's another broken promise because there is still no clear political will or sense of urgency or budget allocation to actually remedy the school infrastructure issue, particularly in rural provinces like the Eastern Cape, KZN, and Limpopo. So we are happy that this is part of the recommendations that they are putting forward, and they're considering some of the calls that we've made, like overcrowding urban areas. But we are also deeply concerned about the lack of sense of urgency around these issues, and also just the lack of accountability when it comes to things like it's still very hard to trace even the extent of how much the problem of school infrastructure is within the Eastern Cape, because when you look at reports, the things that the Eastern Cape Department of Education reports to the legislature, and when you look at NEEM's reports, it doesn't speak the same amount of the problem. You know, there are different figures and different data. So it means that there is still lack of a sense of agency. There's still lack of political will to actually go to these places and remedy the way school infrastructure looks in 2022.
So you're saying the thing that you fought for and you went in court for, the reporting by province, is still not being adhered to. There's still some degree of under-reporting from provinces, or maybe in this particular case, contradictory reporting.
Yes, there is inconsistent reporting. We are happy that in the new proposed amendment, the Department of Basic Education is actually saying that they will now be making the reports public. But we are also concerned about the contents of the report, because previously the norms was clear on some of the details that the report needs to contain in order for school communities to be aware of infrastructure projects happening in their schools. But that information is now omitted when they are saying the reports will be public, which is another barrier to school communities being able to hold the government accountable, but also just not only on reports, but like school projects and updating the current systems that the department already has. It's very possible, Mr. Mdluli, to find a school that is marked on the project report as a school that has been able to get a certain project, but when you go to the ground, you actually find that there is a difference to what's being reported and what's actually happening. So there is still a big issue around data and consistency and its contradiction in different reports that come from the same government. So we are still making that call around making the reports public, but also making the data consistent in all reports so that we can also be able to trace the extent of the problem of school infrastructure in schools, and particularly in rural provinces.
Mr. Makaneta, has the House bolted? I mean, the date for public comments, I think, was 31st of July on this particular amendment to the regulation for norms and standards, or is there something else that we still can do as civil society, as private sector, as NGOs to can hold government accountable for no deadlines?
Yes, of course. I think that the Constitution of the Republic, 1996, empowers communities as well as civil society to continuously hold government accountable. We have recently, returned to the Limpopo Department of Basic Education after they were not able to allocate funding for this particular project that we're talking about of eradicating pit toilets. Remember, some of the treasuries, the provincial treasuries, actually take too long. You'll recall earlier this year, also Eastern Cape, they could not, do their budget on time in relation to books for learners, for instance. And that is why, even though every learner had books on the first day of schooling, but in Eastern Cape, learners were still behind. So I think provinces have to really come on board. I think that the minister must really find, as a society or civil society rather, we must ensure that at all times whenever there are such problems where provinces are dragging their feet, we have got a duty to call upon the minister to act. Equal education on one hand, I see they are busy with litigation, but some of us have adopted an approach where we may not necessarily confront government in courts, but to have that relationship, cordial relationship of engaging them through letters and meetings, so that wherever there are problems, such problems should be addressed. And I think one of them is the issue of the deadlines.
Yeah.
We need to really say, as I said earlier, if everybody in society has got deadlines, government too must have deadlines. It can't be correct that we're just going to keep on shifting at the goalpost, because 2030 may arrive and you may find that we've not yet resolved all the issues that we are talking about today. And then, we'll keep on postponing for future generations. We owe it to ourselves and the next generation to make sure that we eradicate all the pit latrines in our schools, but also to ensure that the issue of overcrowding is thoroughly addressed, because it impacts negatively on learning and teaching in our schools. That is why even today, the issue of unemployment, the issue of dropout rates, which result because of the overcrowded classrooms in most cases. So we really can't fold our arms, and the Constitution is there to empower us to ensure that we hold government accountable at all times.
Let's leave it there. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Itumeleng Mothlabane with equal education in the Eastern Cape, as well as educator and activist Hendrick Makaneta.